Welcome everyone, Christine here on Serious Gaming to talk about the attunement process for World of Warcraft The Burning Crusade Classic when it comes out, so you know what to prepare for. Of all of the expansions in World of Warcraft's history, there has never been a single expansion that has come close to the sheer amount of content that we received at the launch of The Burning Crusade. 15 new dungeons with the addition of Heroic Mode for every single one of them, 3 big new raids with Karazhan, SSC, and Tempest Keep, as well as 2 smaller raids of Gruul's Lair and Macfaridan. Indeed, if one looks at the history of WoW, Burning Crusade likely ends up with the largest amount of raid boss encounters in the entire history of the game. The glue that held all of this together, that made the entire experience work, and made the grand character journey were the attunement quests that required to enter raiding. And it was quite the journey that started from the moment you entered the Dark Portal and started earning reputation, which was needed to then unlock heroic dungeons, and it continued from there on. There was so much to do that looking back at the charts like this one that people used really shows how much you had ahead of you from the moment you crossed over to Outland. And this doesn't really show all of it. This chart doesn't show all of it. This experience was great. And realistically, for the vast majority of the player base, you would spend months, if not more, working on completing all of these steps. If you ever managed to complete them all in the first place, if you ever came close to completing all of this. A side note here is that I personally firmly believe that Serpent Shrine and Tempest Keep should be released with the launch of Classic Burning Crusade, despite what some people might say. Partly because I think having only Karazhan, Gruul, and Mag to do for months wouldn't be a great deal of fun, for pretty obvious reasons, but largely to try and recreate the experience that we did have on retail when Burning Crusade came out, where we were stepping into a new world and we had all of this available from day one. Technically, we had Hyjal as well, but from a purely practical perspective, no guild was ever able to come close to entering Hyjal because no guild was able to kill Kael'thas to get people attuned. And even if they had managed, they didn't have enough vials. You needed a certain amount of vials to be able to get attuned. Every single person needed one. Kael'thas and Vashj only dropped a couple initially until the release of Black Temple. And also the raid content from tier 4 to tier 5 especially, if you read up on the stories from the top raiding guilds, tier 5 especially was buggy as hell. It didn't work. The balance was broken, the mechanics were broken, bosses didn't work. Famously, or rather infamously, Nihilum got the world's first kill of Lady Vashj by apparently bugging her out. We don't quite really know how. Apparently, like, she was in phase 2, they wiped, and she lost HP. Then a Shadow Priest used the Soul Stone to Shadow Word death her. Apparently, that's what the argument people made that happened. Anyway, starting with the Karazhan attunement, it's pretty simple. Get to level 70, go to Karazhan, just outside of Karazhan, do some quests there that require you to kill some ghosts and investigate some wells that will eventually end up with you going to Shatrath, talking with Khadgar to get the key for Karazhan. He will then send you to retrieve these key fragments that he stashed away in Shadow Labyrinth, Steam Vaults, and Arcatraz. So, to open Karazhan, you have to do these 3 max level normal dungeons. But there's more. It's not so simple. Because although you can just enter Steam Vaults and do it, Shadow Labyrinth and Arcatraz require keys. For Shadow Labyrinth, it's fairly simple. Do Cephalic holes on normal, and you get the key from the final boss. Every single person gets the key from the final boss. Arcatraz, on the other hand, does require you to do a quest chain in Netherstorm that then eventually leads you to Adal, who then sends you to clear out the final bosses of both Mechanar and Botanica, and then you get the key. Then you do Arcatraz, and you get your key fragments. This, in turn, however, will have Khadgar send you to the Black Morass to speak with Medivh, which will require a full Black Morass clear, then completion of the quest. Turn all of this in, and you're attuned. But that's not all that Karazhan requires, since you obviously want to summon Nightbane, the true final boss of the instance. Some arguments exist about Prince Malchezaar. I think Nightbane is the final boss. He's probably harder and he's more difficult to summon. This requires honored reputation with the Vail'Tai in the first place. So killing trash for reputation, it is then. Very importantly here is that if you're doing this on week 1, once Burning Crusade Classic comes out, you want to get this reputation done before you kill Shade of Aran, because you'll need to kill him later to be able to summon Nightbane. Once honored, you'll start a quest chain from outside the Karazhan. You'll be sent inside where you'll have to speak to certain ghost NPCs. These are located just after Curator. Now, normally you wouldn't clear all of this trash, especially not the ones, the trash packs next to them. But if you want to get Nightbane summoned, you may want to if you're on week 1. If your guild has already gotten the means to summon Nightbane, then you can wait until the trash despawns. It's linked to Shade of Aran. So once you kill him, they will despawn about 1 hour, 2 hours, maybe half an hour after we kill him. I don't know the exact timers. Anyway, after talking with these NPCs, you'll then get to kill Shade as part of quest, and then you'll leave Karazhan to continue the chain. You'll end up in Area 52 in Netherstorm with a quest giver who requires you to kill the first boss of Sephek Holes on Heroic and the first boss of Shattered Holes on Heroic. The first dungeon will require you to get revered to a lower city for the Heroic key for Akendon. And the second one will require you to get revered with Fralmar/Honorhold for the Hellfire Citadel Heroic key. And then you actually have to do these dungeons and these bosses in particular. You don't have to clear the entirety of these dungeons, you just have to kill the first boss in each of them. Now, Sephek Halls has some annoying and dangerous mobs, but it's really Shadow Halls that's the issue, that takes the cake, so to speak. The path to the first boss, the gauntlet there you could call it, is easily one of the hardest parts of the entire dungeon. A dungeon that's one of the hardest heroics in the entire game, so you can see where I'm going with this. After doing these bosses and looting their quest items and turning that in, you can then summon Nightbane. And you've done the attunement process for the entirety of Tier 4. Simple enough, right? But we're just getting started. Before you kill Nightbane, you and everyone else in your raid, not just one group of people or a couple of people to do the quest, you and everyone may also want to have the Serpent Shrine Cavern attunement quest, which requires the deaths of both Nightbane and Gruul. This isn't too hard, but to get the quest for this, you need to enter Slave Pen's Heroic. Not a hard dungeon, not difficult, but the key for this dungeon on Heroic requires you to get Cenarian Expedition Revered, and for you to pick the quest up and then turn it in once you've completed to get attuned on a Naga prisoner quest giver inside the dungeon. So that can be frustrating. So, in summary, to get attuned to Tier 4 and Serpent Shrine, this requires a few normal dungeons, 3 heroic dungeons that all require different revered reputation keys. Best way to acquire the reputation? Farming Steam Vaults, normal for Cenarian reputation at level 70, Shadow Labyrinth for Lower City, and Shattered Halls normal for Fralmar or Honorhold. You may also benefit from doing a lot of dungeon runs on normal in Hellfire and Zangarmarsh to get a reputation with these factions while leveling. See, you can get the reputation level to honored in those dungeons, be it Ramparts, Blood Furnace, Slave Pens, Underbog, and then questing in those areas. You won't quite manage to get revered reputation by doing the quests, like the dungeons cap you at honored. The quests obviously go all the way to exalted, potentially. But you won't quite manage to get revered. But it will significantly reduce the time you'll need to farm dungeons at 70. You will have to do less grinding in the normal dungeons at 70 to get the reputation that you need. Then we move on to Tempest Keep. The attunement here starts with a long quest chain called the Cipher of Damnation in Shadowmoon Valley, as you gain a glimpse in what Gul'dan's actions unleashed on Draenor. This chain will require a full party to complete, and the boss at the end can be just as tricky as many heroic dungeon bosses. So be warned, it's tricky, don't do it with an undergeared group. You want a full group, a good group. Other people can obviously help, right? Can help the group get credit for it, and you do have NPCs to help you out, but this generally will require a pretty decent group to complete. Once you do that entire quest chain, and this can take you, 1-2 hours, something like that, you'll receive a message from Khadgar, who then directs you to Adal, who in turn wants you to prove yourself before he gives you the Tempest Key. And so begin the trials of the Naaru. There are 4 of them, 3 you get instantly. The 4th one after you complete the first 3. Strength requires you to kill the last 2 bosses of Steam Vaults and Shadow Labyrinth on Heroic. This is reasonably easy to achieve, like Murmur and Califress aren't hard bosses, especially Steam Vaults isn't hard to do as a dungeon, it's one of the easier Heroics in the game. But it can take some time with Shadow Labyrinth. Tenacity, Trials of the Naaru Tenacity, requires a full Heroic run of Arcatraz. The key here is tied to the Shatar faction, and getting their reputation is pretty annoying, since there aren't really that many quests tied to them, and dungeons that give you a reputation are all level 70 dungeons, so you'll have to endure grinding Mechanar, Botanica, and Arcatraz on normal until you have revered reputation, and then do Arcatraz on Heroic. As for the dungeon itself, it's one of the hardest Heroics in the game. One where having interrupts, decursing, and a way to detect invisibility is pretty much mandatory for a good group. And a good group is going to be required here, especially since you only really have one chance to do the quest once you get to the final boss. The goal is to save Millhouse Manastorm. He'll spawn during the final boss event, and if you do wipe here, he will die, and you will be unable to complete the trial on that ID, so I'll have to come again on another day. Thankfully, there is a way to make this easy. You can use someone else's ID. After they've cleared it, you enter the dungeon, you walk all the way until the end. If Millhouse is still there, he does despawn after a while, and you just talk with him after the group has cleared the dungeon, and you complete the quest. So this makes it easier to handle for guilds. Finally, there's Trial of the Naaru Mercy, of the initial 3 trials, the ones dealing with Heroic dungeons. This requires a full chapter to hold Heroic clear on a timer. The timer starts after a second boss. Now, more than all the others so far, this one challenge was what made it hell for a lot of guilds to attune their rosters for Tempest Keep initially. For those of you who have never played Retail Burning Crusade, that's a start. Especially, Shower Holes was a nightmare. A lot of big packs with dangerous mobs, and the quest requires you to do it on a 50-minute timer that starts after you kill the first boss. The worst part by far was that the Ogre boss, with his threat drops, could easily wipe you. So you have a lot of trash packs to deal with, and then you get the Ogre boss who can easily wipe, and if you wipe 2-3 times, you very likely fail the timer with the DPS that people had back then. Technically, you could have a good group do the entire dungeon, then a Warlock summoning some people for the mob that's actually the quest, that drops the quest item you need, but there are certainly some limits to with this. So assume that if you want the Trial of the Naaru, if you want the Attunement for Tempest Keep, you'll have to do it yourself. You'll have to do this dungeon. After this, Adal wants you to kill MacFerdan. Easy, right? Sure. These days, with good internet connections, good PCs, and players handling their classes properly with a solid race setup. Back then, not so much. Being unable to kill MacFerdan was the one thing that prevented a huge amount of guilds from being able to enter Tempest Keep in the first place, before Blizzard removed the attunement requirement with the release of Zul'Aman. The issue he presented was that coordinating 20 people to click cubes on the right time wasn't exactly easy. Hell, it's not even that easy today with all the advantages we have. And that's assuming you even get to the point where you can actually do that. See, the Trash the Boss was famously considered far harder than the boss itself, especially given the respawn times on said Trash early on in the expansion. Then you had the mobs before Maggie spawned, which required solid interrupts and Warlock CCing Infernals. Either way, once you kill Maggie, the trials are complete and you can enter Tempest Keep. To get to this point of even being able to enter both Tier 5 instances requires you to clear all of Tier 4 with every single raid member on the proper quest and to get revered with 4 of the 5 main dungeon factions in Outland. Sounds fun, right? It was hell for a lot of guilds to organize this to get everyone attuned. And that's just doing Tier 4 and Tier 5. We move on to Tier 6. Now, Mount Hyjal in comparison is pretty straightforward. Simply go in, kill Lady Vosh, kill Kael'thas, and loot their vials once you get the quest from Caverns of Time. Easy enough, right? Killing 2 of the hardest bosses in the entire game and 2 complex bosses that required a good amount of raid coordination, right? Especially Kael'thas. But anyway, simple enough. Kill them, get the vials, get attuned. Simple. For Black Temple, this one is a bit more convoluted. It does require dungeons and raiding, but it's more of a story affair with a comma. You'll start a quest in Shadow Moon Valley called the Tablets of Bari from either Aldor or Scryer, regardless of your faction, and you'll eventually end up in front of a comma who will reveal he wants to betray Illidan. First, however, he'll send you to do a couple of quests, of which the most important one here is to find an NPC in Arcatraz. He's towards the end of the instance, just before the final boss room, and seriously, what's with Blizzard in this dungeon? They send us here on 3 different attunement chains. Then you go back to a comma after you find this NPC, do a few more quests in Shadow Moon, including a big 5-man group quest, and then you wait until the Black Temple is released, or until the second part of this quest chain is released. On retail, it happened to the Black Temple. Blizzard might release it earlier with Classic. Anyway, once it comes out, an NPC will spawn after you defeat Phantom Lord Carafres in SSC. This NPC will direct you back to a comma, provided you've done all the quests on the chain so far, and a comma in turn will send you to kill Alar under a Draenei disguise. So here's how the attunement quest works so far. You go Shadow Moon, you then get the quest eventually to go to Arcatraz, then you have to go to SSC when the second part of the chain comes out, then you have to go into Tempest Keep to kill Alar, and then finally, to top it all off, you'll have to go into Mount Hyjal to kill the first boss. After which, you'll get a nice RP event with Maiev and Akama charging the Black Temple, entering the instance, and then you can finally enter the Black Temple yourself after doing that particular quest. And that's it. That's the entire attunement process in a nutshell for the Burning Crusade. Looking back at it, I find it a shame that Blizzard really abandoned these kind of quest chains for future expansions, as they really add quite a bit to the overall experience. It made them more meaningful to enter a raid tier, let alone facing Illidan, Vash, and Kael, after going through this entire process, something that was lacking in Wrath of the Lich King and beyond. It was especially so with the Illidan boss fight, with the contributions of Kama and Maiev especially gave to that fight. Without this process, that many guilds did admittedly find exceptionally frustrating to deal with, since they struggled to get all the people they needed, and it heavily favored poaching between guilds. Still, without it, raiding lost quite a bit of its charm in my view, and became less special. Certainly, we could point the finger, as we always do, at big bad Blizzard, but it's worth remembering that a lot of these changes, or the addition of a 10-man mode for every raid, or the addition of raiding difficulties in Wrath of the Lich King, were supported by quite a large number of people in the community, even if in the long run they ended up being a huge mistake by Blizzard. But that's perhaps a discussion best delved into another video, a discussion on how the changes Blizzard introduced in Wrath of the Lich King ended up ruining World of Warcraft. For now, Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications via the bell icon that you can see there. And if you enjoy my content, do support me via PayPal, Patreon, as it helps keep me going. God bless, and stay tuned for more.